My name is Margaret Whitfield, and I buried my husband on a Tuesday in October, under a sky so gray it looked like it was mourning right along with me. Robert and I had been married for 22 years. Not a fairy tale, nothing ever is, but a good marriage, a real one. He was the kind of man who left sticky notes on the coffee maker just to say good morning, even after 2 decades. He fought cancer for 14 months, and I was there for every single day of it. Every appointment, every bad night, every moment he apologized for being too much trouble, which broke my heart more than the diagnosis ever did. When he passed, something in me went quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet, like a radio switched off mid-song. The funeral itself is mostly a blur now. I remember the folding chairs under the green canopy at the cemetery, the way the funeral director kept a respectful 3 feet away from me at all times, like he'd been trained to sense exactly how close was too close. I remember Robert's coworkers from the architecture firm, a dozen of them, standing in a row like they weren't sure whether hugging was appropriate. I remember my own sister squeezing my hand so hard it left marks. And I remember Karen, dressed head to toe in black that looked a little too new, a little too tailored for someone who claimed she'd thrown it together that morning, delivering a eulogy about her brother that barely mentioned me at all. 22 years of marriage, and in her retelling, Robert's whole adult life seemed to exist mostly in relation to their childhood together. Camping trips, a treehouse their father built, some fishing cabin up north I'd never even heard of. I sat in the front row and told myself it didn't matter. Grief makes people strange, I thought. She's allowed to remember her brother her own way. I didn't know yet how wrong I was to give her that grace. Robert and I met at a friend's barbecue when I was 31. Both of us already a little skeptical of romance, both of us joking that we'd shown up mostly for the food. He proposed 18 months later on the same back porch where we'd met, which he always said was the least original thing he'd ever done, and also the thing he was proudest of. We built a life that was, by most measures, quiet and unremarkable. A mortgage, 2 dogs over the years, Sunday morning crossword puzzles, a running joke about who left the porch light on. It wasn't dramatic, it was just ours. His family had never fully embraced me the way I'd hoped they would. Not in the way my own family embraced Robert the first Christmas I brought him home. There was always a certain distance, a sense that I was tolerated rather than welcomed, though Robert used to insist I was imagining it. "That's just how they are," he'd say. "Give it time." I gave it 22 years. I understand now that the distance was never really about me at all. It was about Karen and what she'd already decided the future looked like, long before any of us knew Robert was sick. I want to tell you that the days after his funeral were about grief. About casseroles from neighbors and condolence cards and trying to remember how to sleep in a bed that suddenly felt too big. And for the first few days, that's exactly what it was. Then, exactly 1 week after we lowered Robert into the ground, his younger sister Karen and his younger brother Stephen showed up at my front door. I remember opening it and feeling a small, foolish flicker of relief. Family. Someone to sit with me. Someone who missed him too. "We just wanted to check on you," Karen said, stepping past me into the house before I'd even finished saying come in. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, which should have told me everything I needed to know about the visit. Stephen trailed behind her, hands in his pockets, eyes doing this nervous little sweep of the living room, the bookshelves, the mantel, the framed photo of Robert and me on our wedding day. He didn't look at me so much as he looked at the house, at its walls, its square footage. I made coffee because that's what you do. That's what Robert would have wanted. Hospitality, even now. We sat in the living room, the 3 of us, and for about 10 minutes it actually felt like comfort. Karen asked how I was sleeping. Stephen mentioned a memory of Robert teaching him to ride a bike. And then Karen set her cup down on the coffee table, no coaster, which Robert would have gently teased her about, and said the sentence that changed everything. "You know, Margaret, this house was really supposed to stay with the family." I laughed. I actually laughed because I thought she was joking or grieving in some strange, sideways way people sometimes do. She wasn't joking. Robert always said, growing up, that whoever ended up with the house would look after the rest of us, she continued, like she was reading from a script she'd rehearsed in the car. Mom and Dad helped with the down payment on the very first house you two had, remember? Before this one. That's family money. That's family history. I looked at Stephen, waiting for him to laugh too, to roll his eyes at his sister's audacity. Instead, he just stared at his coffee cup like it had personally wronged him. Robert isn't even in the ground a full week, I said quietly. We know, Karen said, and had the nerve to look wounded, as if I'd been the one who brought up money over a coffin. That's exactly why we came now, before things get complicated. I didn't understand yet what she meant by complicated. I would, soon enough. Robert would have wanted us to sort this out fairly, Stephen added, finally finding his voice, though he still couldn't quite look at me. As a family. Robert wanted a lot of things, I said. He wanted to see 65. He wanted to retire and finally build that boat he kept talking about. He didn't get those things either, Stephen. That landed harder than I meant it to. Karen's jaw tightened, but she recovered fast, the way she always did, smoothing her expression back into something sympathetic. We're not trying to upset you, she said. We're trying to protect what's fair, that's all. They left about 20 minutes later, Karen hugging me stiffly at the door, murmuring something about how we'd figure it all out together as a family. Stephen mumbled a goodbye without meeting my eyes. I stood in my doorway long after their car pulled out of the driveway, feeling something cold settle into my chest that had nothing to do with the October air. Because I remembered something Karen didn't know I remembered. 3 years ago, at a holiday dinner, after too much wine, Karen had cornered Robert in the kitchen. I'd overheard just enough through the doorway to catch her asking him, pushing him, to promise that the house would come back to the family someday. Robert had brushed her off, changed the subject. I hadn't thought about it since. Until now. I want to say the visit stopped there, that Karen and Stephen came to their senses, apologized, and let a grieving widow have her peace. That is not what happened. 3 days later, Karen called. Not to check on me, to inform me she'd hired an attorney to help clarify the family's position on the estate. The estate, I repeated slowly. Karen, there is no estate to clarify. This is my house. Robert and I bought it together 12 years ago. With money that originated in part from the sale of your first house, she said, and I could hear the rustle of paper on her end, like she was reading from notes, which our parents helped fund. That makes it a family asset, legally speaking. I don't have a law degree, but even I knew that was nonsense. The kind of nonsense that sounds almost plausible if you say it with enough confidence, which Karen has always had in spades. Over the following 2 weeks, it got worse. Karen called the mortgage company directly, apparently trying to get information about the loan on my house. I only found out because the bank called me, confused, asking why a Karen Whitfield Doyle had been requesting account details. She wasn't on the mortgage. She wasn't on the deed. She had no legal standing whatsoever. That didn't stop her from trying. It didn't end with the bank. Karen also reached out to our longtime next-door neighbor, Diane, apparently fishing for information about how things looked around the house, whether I'd mentioned selling, whether I'd had any contractors or realtors over. Diane, bless her, called me the same afternoon, half laughing, half alarmed. Your sister-in-law just grilled me about your gutters, Margaret. Your gutters. I think she's casing the place. We both laughed about it at the time, though looking back, it wasn't really funny at all. It was a woman building a case, brick by brick, convinced that if she gathered enough small pieces of evidence, the house would simply fall into her hands through sheer persistence. Then came the group text. Karen had added me, Stephen, and several cousins I barely spoke to into a thread titled, without any apparent irony, Family Matters. She used it to post long messages about honoring Robert's true wishes and keeping the family home in the family, carefully worded enough that anyone skimming might assume there was some real dispute over ambiguous wishes, rather than a widow being pressured out of the house she'd shared with her husband for over a decade. A few cousins liked her messages, with a thumbs-up emoji, which felt like its own small betrayal, even though I knew most of them had no idea what was actually happening. Stephen, for his part, didn't call much, but he did show up once, alone, on a rainy Thursday evening. I almost didn't recognize the look on his face. It wasn't greed, not exactly. It was something more like exhaustion. "Karen's not going to let this go," he told me, standing on my porch, refusing to come in. "She's been talking about it for years, Margaret, ever since Mom and Dad passed. She thinks she got shortchanged in that estate, and somehow this house has become, I don't know, a symbol to her." "And what do you think?" I asked him. He looked away. "I think I need this to be over. I've got debts. If there's even a chance of getting something out of this..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I closed the door a little harder than I meant to. The following week brought what I can only describe as the strangest phone call of my life. Karen's husband called me. Not Karen herself, but him, sounding uncomfortable, almost apologetic, as if he'd drawn the short straw at home. He said Karen had been under a lot of stress, and that maybe if I just showed a little flexibility, things could be resolved quietly, without involving lawyers, without airing family business. I asked him directly what flexibility meant, and after a long pause, he admitted it meant putting the house on the market and splitting the proceeds 3 ways. I told him, as politely as I could manage, that the house wasn't for sale, and that I'd appreciate it if future conversations about my late husband's estate came from people who actually had legal standing to have them. He apologized again, quickly, and hung up. That call told me something important. This wasn't just Karen anymore. She'd pulled her husband into it, was likely working on Stephen's wife too, building a small chorus of relatives who'd absorbed her version of events without ever hearing mine. I felt, for the first time, like I was being surrounded rather than simply grieved alongside. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of unopened sympathy cards, feeling more alone than I had at any point since Robert's diagnosis. His entire family, the family I'd hosted every Thanksgiving for over 2 decades, the family I'd driven to hospitals and airports and school plays for, had, in the space of 3 weeks, reduced my husband's death to a real estate opportunity. I thought about calling my own sister, 3 states away, just to hear a friendly voice. Instead, I found myself walking down the hallway to Robert's home office, a room I hadn't been able to bring myself to enter since he died. The door had stayed shut for 3 weeks, like some kind of unspoken agreement between me and the empty air that his things would stay exactly as he'd left them. But that night, something pulled me toward it. I stood in the hallway for a good 5 minutes before I turned the knob, one hand pressed flat against the door, like I was checking whether it was warm, whether some part of him still lingered on the other side of it. Robert used to work in there most evenings after dinner, sketching out house plans on his drafting table, even though the firm had gone fully digital years ago. He liked the feel of pencil on paper, he always said. Liked the mistakes you could see and erase, rather than the ones that just vanished into a computer with a keystroke. I used to bring him tea around 9 o'clock most nights, and he'd pull me onto his lap for a minute before sending me off to bed, promising he wouldn't be much longer. He almost always was. The office smelled like him still. Old paper, cedar, the faint trace of his aftershave clinging to a jacket draped over his desk chair. I stood in the doorway for a long moment before I made myself walk in. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I think I just wanted to feel close to him. I ran my hand along his desk, his bookshelves, the framed photo of the 2 of us at Niagara Falls on our 10th anniversary. That's when I noticed the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet was slightly ajar. Unusual because Robert was meticulous, almost military about his filing system. I knelt down and pulled it open. Inside was a manila folder I didn't recognize, labeled in his handwriting, M, important, read after. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside was a will. A new one, dated just over 2 years earlier, roughly 8 months after his diagnosis. Not the will we'd made together back when we first bought the house, the one I thought was the only one that existed. This was different. This was updated. And it was notarized, signed, witnessed by 2 names I didn't recognize. People from his office, I'd learn later. Underneath the will was a letter, folded in thirds, my name written on the front in his familiar, slightly slanted handwriting. I sat down right there on the office floor and read it. Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and it especially must pass that you finally came in here. I'm sorry for that. I know how hard this room will be for you. I need to tell you something I probably should have told you years ago. About 2 years back, not long after my diagnosis, Karen came to me asking for money. Again. This wasn't the first time, you know that, even if I never told you the full extent of it. But this time she asked for more than I'd ever given her. And when I said no, she got angry in a way that scared me a little. She told me, almost like a threat, that the house should go to family, not to an outsider. Meaning you, Margaret. My wife of 20 years. An outsider. That's when I understood something about my sister that I'd spent my whole life not wanting to see. She has never once, in all these years, viewed you as family. She views you as an obstacle between her and something she believes she's owed. So I updated the will. I want to be clear about what I've done, so there's no confusion after I'm gone. The house is yours, fully, no conditions. I've left Stephen a modest sum, not because he's earned it, but because I remember what it was like being the younger brother in that family, always overlooked, always doing what Karen told him. I hope it helps him get on his feet, though I won't pretend I have much faith it will. I've left Karen nothing. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. I spent too many years smoothing things over with her, making excuses, protecting a version of my sister that I wanted to exist instead of the one who actually did. I won't do it anymore, even from the grave. I love you, Margaret. Every day of these 22 years was worth it. Don't let my family take one more day of peace from you than they already have. One more thing. I know you. Entirely everything, some part of you will want to give Karen the benefit of the doubt one last time, will want to handle this quietly so nobody gets hurt any worse than they already are. You don't owe her that. You've spent your whole marriage being generous to my family, hosting them, forgiving them, making room for them. You don't have to keep doing that now that I'm not there to ask it of you. Protect yourself. Protect our home. That's the last thing I'm asking. I don't know how long I sat on that office floor. Long enough that my legs went numb. Long enough for the light outside the window to shift from evening blue to full dark. I had my answer. I had, in Robert's own hand, the truth of everything. But I also understood, reading that letter, that I had a choice to make about how I used it. I could have called Karen that very night and ended it immediately. Read her the will over the phone, watched her scramble to explain herself. Some petty, wounded part of me wanted to, but I sat with the letter a while longer instead, and something Robert wrote kept circling back to me. Don't let my family take one more day of peace from you than they already have. Rushing to confront Karen out of anger felt like giving her power over my next move, the same way she tried to take power over my next several years. I decided I would let her keep talking, let her keep building her case in front of witnesses, and when she was finished, I would show her exactly how solid the ground I was standing on had been the entire time. I didn't sleep much that night, but for the first time since Robert died, it wasn't only grief keeping me awake. It was something steadier, something almost like resolve. Karen didn't give me much time to decide. 10 days after I found the will, she called to say the family was gathering at Stephen's house that Sunday to work things out amicably, without lawyers, like a real family should. The irony of that sentence, coming from the woman who'd already hired an attorney, wasn't lost on me. But I agreed to go. Partly because I wanted to see exactly how far she intended to take this. Partly because Robert's letter had given me something I hadn't had in weeks, solid ground to stand on. I didn't tell them about the will. Not yet. Sunday afternoon, I walked into Stephen's living room to find not just Karen and Stephen, but Karen's husband, an older cousin named Phyllis I barely knew, and, to my genuine shock, a stack of papers already laid out on the coffee table, along with a pen. "We drew something up," Karen said, sliding the papers toward me before I'd even sat down. "A fair division." 60-40, since you're only one person and there are two of us with equal claim to Robert's legacy. Equal claim, I repeated. He was our brother before he was your husband, Karen said, and something about the smugness in her voice, the sheer entitlement of the statement, made the room go very still. I didn't sign anything. I sat down, folded my hands, and let her keep talking because I wanted witnesses. Phyllis, mostly, who I could tell was uncomfortable but hadn't said a word, to hear exactly what Karen thought she was owed and why. She didn't disappoint. Over the next 20 minutes, Karen laid out in detail why she believed the house belonged to the family and not to me. She brought up the down payment on a house we'd sold over a decade ago. She brought up family sacrifice she claimed had gone into Robert's success, though, as far as I knew, Karen had never once helped Robert professionally or financially in his entire adult life. If anything, it had always run the other direction. She even, at one point, suggested that since Robert and I had never had children, the house should, logically, pass to his siblings' children instead of staying with someone who'll have no one to leave it to. That last comment landed exactly the way she wanted it to. It hurt. Robert and I had wanted children and hadn't been able to have them, and she knew it. And she used it anyway, right there in her brother-in-law's living room, not even 2 months after burying her own brother. Phyllis finally spoke up at that point, her voice thin but audible. Karen, that's enough. I didn't come here for this. Karen shot her a look sharp enough to cut glass, and Phyllis didn't say another word for the rest of the afternoon, though she also didn't leave, which told me she wanted to see how it ended just as much as I did. Karen's husband, who I'll admit I'd almost forgotten was in the room, cleared his throat and offered a weak, "Let's all just stay calm." The kind of sentence men say when they want credit for peacekeeping without actually doing anything to keep the peace. I looked at Stephen. He was staring at the floor. "You knew about this?" I asked him. "You knew she was going to say that?" He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I stood up. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Something in me had gone very calm, very clear, the way Robert used to get right before he made an important decision. "I think it's time you all knew something," I said. I told them about the folder, about the letter. I didn't read Robert's private words to me out loud. Those were mine, not theirs to hear. But I told them the will existed, that it was dated, notarized, and witnessed, and that it directly addressed the exact conversation happening in that living room. Karen's face went through several expressions in quick succession: disbelief, suspicion, and finally something close to panic. "That's not possible," she said. "There's no way Robert updated his will without me knowing." "Why would he tell you?" I asked, "given what's in it?" Karen's husband tried to jump in again. Something about how these things can be contested, and for the first time all afternoon, Stephen actually spoke without being prompted. "Just stop," he said quietly, not looking up. "Let her finish." It was such a small thing, 4 words. But it was the first time in the entire ordeal that Stephen had said anything even resembling a boundary with his sister, and I think it startled Karen more than anything I'd said. I called my attorney the following Tuesday, a woman named Ellen Park, who Robert and I had used for years, who had, in fact, been one of the witnesses on the updated will, something I hadn't even registered until she reminded me during our call. We scheduled a formal reading. Not because it was strictly required, but because I wanted no ambiguity left. I wanted Karen to hear it from someone whose words she couldn't dismiss as grief-addled or vindictive. We met in Ellen's office on a Thursday morning. Karen arrived with her own attorney in tow, clearly expecting a fight. Stephen came alone, looking like a man walking into a dentist's appointment he couldn't cancel. Ellen read the will aloud, plainly, professionally. The house, along with the remainder of the estate, passed entirely to me. A specified sum, modest, exactly as Robert described in his letter, was left to Stephen, with a note attached that Ellen read verbatim. "I don't deserve more support than I ever gave him. Use this to build something for yourself, not for anyone else." There was nothing for Karen. Not the house, not a token amount, not even a personal note. Karen's attorney tried, briefly, to raise questions about the will's validity. timing, mental capacity, undue influence. Ellen calmly produced the notarization records, the witness statements, and medical documentation confirming Robert's full mental competency at the time of signing, 8 months after his diagnosis, but well before treatment had affected his cognition. The challenge dissolved almost as quickly as it had been raised. Ellen also addressed, calmly and for the record, the family asset argument Karen had been repeating for weeks, the claim that money from Robert's parents decades earlier entitled her to a share of a house purchased under both my name and Robert's, with a mortgage we alone had paid for 12 years. There is no legal theory under which a gift made to your brother 30 years ago creates an ownership interest for you in a home he and his wife purchased and paid for together as adults, Ellen said, in the same even tone she might use to explain a parking regulation. I'd encourage you to consult independent counsel on that point, because I don't believe you've been given accurate advice. Karen's attorney didn't respond to that. He just closed his folder. Karen sat very still through all of it, and when it was over, she looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. Not sadness, not even really anger, just cold calculation. The look of someone recalculating a bet they've been certain they'd win. This isn't over, she said, standing abruptly, chairs scraping against the floor. It is, actually, Ellen said, not unkindly. Legally, it's quite settled. Karen left without another word, her attorney trailing behind her, already on his phone. Stephen stayed behind. He sat there for a long moment after everyone else had gone, staring at the folder in front of him, at his brother's handwriting on the note Ellen had read aloud. I'm sorry, he finally said, for all of it. I let her talk me into things because it was easier than standing up to her. It's been that way our whole lives. I know, I said, and I did. I'd watched it happen for 22 years. He asked, hesitantly, if it would be all right to call me sometime. Just to talk. Not about the estate, not about Karen, just to talk. I told him yes. It surprised me how much I meant it. Karen never spoke to me again after that day. I heard, secondhand, through a cousin, that she'd told people I manipulated a dying man into cutting her out. A story so far from the truth it would have been almost funny, if it weren't so exhausting. I let it go. I'd learned over the previous 2 months exactly how much energy I was willing to spend defending myself to people who'd already decided what they wanted to believe. Stephen, though, kept coming around, awkwardly at first. A phone call here, a brief visit there, but genuinely. He used the money Robert left him to pay off a chunk of debt and start over, small as it was. Somewhere in that slow, quiet rebuilding, I think he also started becoming the brother-in-law Robert had always hoped he'd be, underneath all that fear of his sister. He told me once, over coffee at my kitchen table, the same table where Karen had first dropped her comment about the house staying with the family, that he'd spent most of his adult life letting Karen make decisions for him because it was easier than the alternative. She's been steering things since we were kids, he said. I think some part of me thought if I just went along with it, I'd finally get whatever it was she always promised was coming. Turns out, there was never anything coming, just more steering. I didn't have much to say to that except that it wasn't too late to stop, and that Robert, of all people, would have understood exactly what he meant. Karen, for her part, sold her house 2 years later and moved out of state, according to the same cousin who occasionally passed along news I hadn't asked for. I don't know if the two things are connected, the will, the fallout, the move, and I've stopped letting myself wonder about it. Some doors close, and the healthiest thing you can do is let them. 6 months after the funeral, on what would have been Robert's birthday, Stephen showed up at the house with a small potted maple tree, Robert's favorite. We planted it together in the backyard, not saying much, just working the soil in comfortable silence. I still have Robert's letter. I keep it in the drawer of my nightstand now, not locked away in a filing cabinet gathering dust, but close, where I can reach it on the nights I need to hear his voice again, even just on paper. I also kept his drafting table exactly where it always was, in the office that no longer feels like a room I have to brace myself to enter. Some evenings I sit in his chair, not to draft anything, just to feel close to the particular kind of quiet he used to work in. Diane next door still asks about the gutters sometimes, half joking, and we laugh about it now the way you can only laugh at something once it's safely behind you. Last spring, Stephen brought his 2 kids over for the first time since Robert's passing. A boy and a girl, 8 and 11, who I hadn't seen in nearly 2 years because Karen had always found reasons to keep visits to a minimum. They ran straight for the backyard, delighted by the maple tree, and Stephen's daughter asked if she could help water it. I said yes, and I stood on the porch, watching her drag the hose across the lawn, and for just a moment, the house was full of the kind of noise it hadn't had in far too long. People sometimes ask me if I regret how things unfolded. The confrontation, the will reading, the permanent rift with Karen. I don't. Robert spent 20 years trying to smooth things over with his sister, trying to believe the best of her long after the evidence stopped supporting it. In the end, he did the one thing he'd never quite managed to do while he was alive. He told the truth, clearly and completely, and let the consequences fall where they belong. I think about that maple tree in the backyard sometimes. How small it looked the day we planted it, how it's already taller than I am now. Grief doesn't disappear, it just finds a place to grow, the same way that tree did, quietly, steadily, in soil that was finally, truly mine.